Hello, and welcome to PreCalc Lesson 27. Today we're going to cover related angles and signs of trigonometric functions. So we've kind of already talked about this in Algebra 2 quite frequently. Obviously, we measure, or not obviously for some, we measure all angles from the positive x-axis. So this is where we like to start. So if I have an angle here, it's pretty simple. Let's say this is 30 degrees. So this is pointing at 30 degrees. We're not surprised. But suppose we have an angle in the second quadrant of 30 degrees. Well, if I just said, hey, go 30 degrees, that wouldn't make sense because we measure from the positive x-axis in math class. Oh, my cap is gone. So, in fact, the related angle to that is this one, which is 150 degrees. How did I get that? Well, for all angles in the second quadrant, you take 180 minus the angle, okay? And that gets me the related angle, or the angle that I actually want, okay? Again, if you told me to go in the direction of 30 degrees, I would travel that way. But you really meant that way, so you have to say 150. In the third quadrant, related angles are similar. If you want 30 degrees in this direction, then you add 180 to it. So our related angle, in this case, is 210 degrees. Why? Because I want the angle from the positive x-axis that gets me to that. So it's 180 plus that angle. Finally, in the fourth quadrant, if I go 30 degrees, there's actually two ways to do this one. You could go negative 30 and be fine, or you could say that it is 330 degrees. How did I get that? Well, it's 360 minus your angle. And that's related angles. Now, how is this going to help us? Well, we are going to find trigonometric functions now, not just in the first quadrant. So far, you've dealt with sine of 30, 60, and 45, cosine 30, 60, 45, and tangent of 30, 60, and 45. But we can actually find those angles, and your friendly angles quiz is just about to get a little bit harder. So we can also find the related angles to those in these different quadrants. So what is sine of 30 degrees? Well, if we draw out our friendly triangle, right, 30 degrees usually lives right there. If this is 30, I know this is the first time we've put it on a coordinate plane, so just track with me here. This would be 60, and this is 90. There's our friendly triangle. Sine of 30 would be 1 over 2. Now, if I take the related angle to 30 degrees in this quadrant, I can also find sine of that angle. So what is the related angle in the second quadrant to 30 degrees? Well, this angle is 150. So I can find sine of 150. It is still 1/2. Something I want you to note here, I went up to get 1, but I went back to get the root 3. So I'm going to make that negative. Even though we don't really have negative distances, when we mark it on the coordinate plane, that makes sense. Now let's look at the third quadrant. So what if I had 30 degrees here? Well, I'd have to go down 1, and I have to go back root 3. My hypotenuse is still 2. So what is the related angle in the third quadrant to 30? I know we're getting messy here. This is 210. So I can find sine of 210. How am I going to do that? Well, the opposite side is -1. The hypotenuse is 2. The hypotenuse will always be positive for all of these. So it's -1/2. Notice that it's basically the same answer. The sign, either positive or negative, changes, but that's about it. So in this quadrant here, I can also write my 30 degrees. This is positive, this is negative because I went down, and it is a right triangle. What angle is the corresponding angle to 30 degrees in the fourth quadrant? Oh dear, maybe I'll fit it inside. Well, it's 330. So I can also find sine of 330. That is -1/2, because the opposite is -1. The hypotenuse is 2. So now you're responsible for all 4 of these on your friendly angles quiz. Now, can I do the same with 60? Sure, right? So 60 degrees, what are the corresponding angles in the different quadrants for 60? Well, 60 is going to be 120, 240, and 300, using these formulas here, right? 180 minus the angle, 180 plus the angle, and 360 minus the angle. So I can find sine of all of these because I know what sine of 60 is. What's sine of 60? It's √3/2. So sine of 120 is also going to have a √3/2. Sine of 240 is going to have a √3/2. And sine of 300 is going to have a √3/2. But the trick is 2 of these are going to be negative. Which 2 are negative for the sine function? Well, it's the ones in the third and fourth quadrant. We can also do the exact same thing for 45 degrees. Now, by now, you've hopefully noticed a pattern. For the sine function, we will, if we have angles in the first and second quadrant, get positive numbers out. If we have angles in the third and fourth quadrant, we get negative. So basically what I'm saying is that you are going to take the angle, whatever it is, find the corresponding angle or the related angle, solve for sine, cosine, or tangent of that, and then apply the correct sign, positive or negative, to it. Now let's look at cosine. Cosine is a bit different. For the same reasons, and I would challenge you as you're doing these problems for now, write out the triangles like I did earlier with positive and negative signs. Cosine is going to be positive in these 2 quadrants and negative in those 2. Let's do an example just for fun. Let's find cosine of 120 degrees. So where does 120 live? Well, it lives right about there, with this as 60 if this is 120. So I'm going to draw my triangle down and then fill in the missing spots in my 30, 60, 90 triangle. So that would be -1, square root of 3, and 2. Why did I do negative? Because I went back in x, but I went up in y. Now what is cosine? Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So we get -1/2. Okay? So you can do this for each and every one. Here, both of your sides will be negative if it's in the third quadrant. In the fourth quadrant, only your y value will be negative, or your opposite. Okay, finally, here are the signs that we apply to tangent. Tangent is weird, but we're not surprised. A cool trick about tangent is that it is simply sine over cosine. So if you memorize sine and cosine, you can find tangent. If sine is positive and cosine is positive in the first quadrant, then tangent will be positive. If sine is positive and cosine is negative, positive divided by a negative is a negative. Sine is negative, cosine is negative, negative divided by a negative is positive. And then sine is negative, cosine is positive, negative divided by a positive is negative. So, one last thing before we finish. There's a quick and easy way to remember all of these so that you don't have to like draw out the triangle each time. And the way to do that is there's this cool little, it's not even a mnemonic, it's just a fun saying, okay? It may not even be true, but all students take calculus. That's not true of everybody, but it's definitely true of you guys. So, all of them, all three functions are positive here because it's all. In the second quadrant, sine is positive. That's why there's an S. Tangent and cosine are negative. In the third quadrant, for t, tangent is positive. The rest of them are negative. In the fourth quadrant, cosine is positive, and the rest are negative. So if you just remember all students take calculus and remember the first letter of each of those, then you'll know which ones are positive. And that, my friends, is problem set 26.